All right, we're on. Maulik, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing great, Antoine.
Excellent. I'm really excited to talk to you today and super grateful that you carved out some time to chat with me. For reference sake, you and I met around 2008 when I joined the company that you were already working for. And I was working in professional services at the time. And you were in the support group, I believe. And we spent a good 2-3 years there, I think, together before going our sort of separate ways. And you've accomplished quite a bit of success in that time. It's been now 13-14 years, I think, since we first met. And your story really fascinates me, and I'm really excited to just chat with you and understand, sort of your personal journey and how you sort of made your dreams a reality and you accomplished your goals. So I know that obviously the company we worked for eventually got acquired while you were there, which is really exciting, right? I think there's usually two outcomes people look for. They look for an acquisition or an IPO, and you've had both, right? So the company we worked for got acquired, and then you moved on to a different company and you've been there for a while, and that company recently went public. So you got the double, like lightning struck twice in your case, which is really exciting. And I don't think that those things happen by accident. So what I wanted to chat with you about is just sort of understand your personal journey and some of the things that you've experienced and you've gone through have helped you get to sort of where you are. So that's a brief summary about you from my perspective. What do you want to share about yourself for people to know, where you're from, your background, your upbringing, anything there to help people understand sort of like your profile?
Yeah, absolutely, Antoine. First of all, thank you for doing this, and I'm honored. This is great. It's nice to chat about some of the things that I've been able to accomplish through the journey, and also very excited about the outcomes that we've had. But I'll give a little background. I was born and raised in Mumbai in India. Grew up there all my life. Did my education in India as well, and then came over right around that time, 2008-9, to run a couple of different groups for the previous company that we worked at, and that was kind of the beginning of the journey that we've had. But that's a little bit about me. Personally, I play a lot of sports. I played a ton of different leagues, including minor leagues in India, cricket. So I used to play that. I still play the sport. And then I live in California now, and I got 2 beautiful children and a very happy family from that standpoint. So knock on wood. But I think the things I'll probably just share a couple of things here, and we'll then move on and go with the flow there, Antoine. I'll tell you some of the things that have really helped me be successful over the last 13-14 years have really been a lot of perseverance and grit. Right, I use that word very specifically and objectively from time to time because I think it means a lot. That's a skill you don't teach regularly. So I think the perseverance and grit component of that has been a very important one for me. One of the other things I'll also share is what I've been trying to cultivate over these last few years, Antoine, is a combination of understanding the business dynamics, the insights, and pairing them with lightning speed execution. And when you do that, I think you quickly analyze a situation, things that are going sideways or not right in your business. You define an execution plan and execute that to perfection. And that helps you stay ahead of competition. That helps you make your teams more successful. And the visibility into the data and reacting and acting to that is very critical as well. One of the things that is most underappreciated sometimes is the skill of connecting the dots. And connecting those dots can happen with a lot of good data. And so I think data analysis and execution at lightning speed is paramount, and that's helped me. But then you have to continue to persevere with that and have the grit towards it. So, that's a little bit about me and some of the things I've learned through the process here.
Okay, I love that. There's 2 areas I want to drill down on a little bit more. You mentioned grit, and then you also mentioned connecting the dots, and you heard me react because I've said that myself. I want to explore both of those a little bit more, if you don't mind. Let's first talk about grit. Talk to me about, is that something you felt just came naturally to you? Like, were you always like that as a kid growing up? Or is that something you acquired? Because I'll tell you what, personally, I did not have grit when I was a kid. I was a troublemaker and I was always in trouble, and I didn't get better and develop things like grit and other good qualities until I was older. So I'm just wondering, in your case, was it naturally sort of there as part of like your upbringing, or did you acquire it over time the way I did?
It's a very interesting question, and I'll tell you, I started playing cricket when I was 7 years old, at a very young age, and I started playing a lot of that. And I grew up with, and I used to play with kids who were much more older than me. When we used to live in an apartment complex, there would be kids who would be much more older than me, and they'd always look at me like, oh, that's a little kid, he won't do much. And so I think sometimes having gone through a situation like that really helped me develop the perseverance, because it would always be like, these are older kids, 7, 8, 10 years older to me, and I'm not going to be able to compete with them. But sometimes you start developing that, and I think it organically started happening over a period of time. So I think I relate a lot of my career aspects to my my sporting career as well, because I think that's always helped me develop a lot more. I'll tell you, even leadership skills. A lot of the leadership skills I learned were at a very young age when I used to lead my teams, even in cricket. So I think it's just one of those things that I started developing at a very early age, and from there it just continued moving on. Right? We were also, I was raised in a moderate upbringing. Right? It was not the most flamboyant lifestyle that we had at that point. And so I think it also kind of builds you up a little bit from that perspective, where you really need to work hard and get to those those goals. So that's, just to answer your question there, that's something I've continued to develop, and I've kind of gone way back in my childhood where it started developing for me.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it sounds like when it came to sports and playing cricket, you intentionally put yourself in an uncomfortable situation playing against other kids that were bigger than you and maybe older than you. So that's unusual, right? Most people don't do that because that's dangerous and it's kind of scary. So, yeah. So again, did that come naturally to you, or did your parents sort of force you? Like, how does that happen? Because see, I think there's common themes. When I talk to people that have been successful like you, I'm keying in and identifying trends that everyone has in common. And what you described is certainly one of them. And personally, I think I've done that myself to a certain degree, put myself in uncomfortable positions, taken myself out of my comfort zone. So again, for you, was that natural, or did your parents sort of force you?
No, it was a lot more naturally. I think, for the most part, my parents did not want me to keep playing cricket to begin with. So I think it was a lot more naturally for me that started happening. And I started putting myself in some of those situations, one for the love of sport, and then also because I wanted to continue excelling in what I do. I think that's, the essence of grit is also your passion to be successful. I think I use that word very frequently as well, because that is one of the key fundamental pillars that has been in my career, just the passion for what you do. So, from that perspective, I think I continued to put myself in those situations, and it just organically happens after that.
Okay, so you said passion, and I want to touch on that as well. Yep. But before I do, let me make sure I touch on what you said earlier that I wanted to explore a little bit further. You mentioned
connecting the
connecting the dots. So again, that really resonated for me. I'm assuming you and I are talking about the same things, but tell me what that means for you, connecting the dots.
It's a very interesting thing, and I sometimes also see a lot of our leaders and people in the organization. Sometimes they're unable to connect the dots and hence get to the end point faster. And I'll give you examples of that. Right? I think sometimes. One is visibility, right? You need to have visibility to connect the dots. If you have visibility at multiple levels, then you're easily able to connect those dots. I'll tell you, I sit in so many different sort of meetings, and I would look at one of the data points that somebody's displaying, and I'd go, maybe this implementation is going longer. What's going to have an impact on my renewal at some point? Or hey, there's a support ticket here, which is going to have an impact on one of the customers go live or something like that, right? connecting those dots quickly enables you to avoid a situation. It also helps you get ahead of the problem and start, kind of solving it. And people don't appreciate that as much. I think connecting the dots, what I've figured out, is actually one of the most important skills at our levels, because if you can connect those faster, you can make better decisions, and you can really make a difference across the board.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And oftentimes what I've said is being able to differentiate, the forest from the trees, or the symptoms from the root cause issues. What I have found in my experience is within organizations, oftentimes you can spend a lot of time trying to solve for symptoms or sort of, when if you don't take a step back and identify sort of the root cause, you're never going to get ahead. And so why do you think that's so you have that, I have that, but why do you think that's such a elusive sort of goal to achieve for people? Why is it organizations get so sort of blinded by smoke, or again, downstream issues?
Yeah, because it's not a skill that is taught anywhere, where you don't have courses for that. I think it's to an extent. I always think that our brain functions like this big data machine, right? And it collects data, and then we continue to kind of look at situations, and then something triggers. And I think that's where I think it happens through a lot more visibility. The reason that it's not such a popular skill either is because people may not have visibility like you and I do in certain areas. Like, for example, in my role, I'm looking at almost every part of our business, right? And so I'm able to join those dots quicker. And that's what I've been trying to do over the last several years, Antoine, where I need to develop leaders. When I bring leaders in, I start inviting them to so many different meetings. And sometimes they're like, why am I sitting in this meeting? I'm wasting my time. I'm like, no. Just listen in, sit in, and absorb, be a sponge, because it's important. This is going to be helpful in some other place. And I think that's the thing that we need to start cultivating. I think giving the visibility to your leaders across the board can help you actually make a much bigger impact.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to touch on that, but before I go there, let me make sure I touch on, you mentioned passion earlier. So what's your why, Maulik? Like, tell me why you get out of bed in the morning. And the reason I'm asking is I'm betting that what you're doing aligns perfectly with your why, meaning, the old expression, do what you love and you never work another day in your life. And, it sounds like a cliche, but to me, it's so true. And it's sad, I think, when I meet people that maybe are doing a thing or a job for the sake of a paycheck, but it's not actually what they love. They always dream about something else. So in your case, I get the sense you're probably doing what you love, aren't you?
Yes. So you asked me about the why. I like my threes. So I'm going to give you the threes on why I get out of bed every morning. Passion is the word I use, right? I think passion about making a difference in everything you do. It does not matter, what you're doing today, but if you make a difference in what you're doing, that's the most important thing for me. I've been fortunate, Antoine, and to your point, I'm working in an industry that I really care for. Again, when I was growing up, I think education was such a paramount thing. If you want to be successful, you had to be educated. You had to learn. You had to, get the right degrees. You had to get the right visibility and the knowledge. And I think I feel fortunate that I work in an industry that has a similar mission. So I love the purpose. So that's my first one. Making a difference in everything I do, and I love the purpose.
Yeah.
Second is making people around me successful. I'm very fortunate in my role to be able to lead a very large group of teams, and have a lot of good leaders, some very, very capable leaders, and I love their success. I think one of the things that really drives me is celebrating success of my team members, and that's my second thing. And the third is I'm a lifelong learner, and I wake up to learn every day. I want to get 1% better every single day.
I love that. And for what it's worth, totally resonates for me. And I share those qualities. So you talked about leadership and the pleasure you get from helping develop other leaders. So let me take a step back, because I touched upon some of the organizational success that you've enjoyed in your career, but also personally, obviously, you sort of climbed the ladder. So when you and I were working together, you were already in a leadership position, but since then you've had several other leadership roles. You've progressively gotten higher and higher. So I'm just looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I'll put a link in the description to the video so people can find your profile. But I'm just going to say you were SVP Professional Services, then you were Chief Customer Officer, and then you've recently become Chief Operating Officer. So, and obviously, again, in all those roles, you have been leading others. And you talked about, again, the pleasure you get from helping develop others. I didn't get that personally when I started out in leadership. I learned that over time through a lot of training and experience. Was it the same for you? Again, because I think obviously there's natural qualities you have, like the grit and your drive. But I'm wondering, surely there must have been training programs or books or anything you went through that you can refer to say, like, this helped me. Like, how did you figure that out? Because not every leader or manager does.
So I start relating to you'll start sensing a pattern here, because I start relating to a lot of things from my upbringing and how from my childhood, etc. But I think I spent a lot of time with my grandfather when I grew up. Things I learned from him are lifelong real nuggets for me to use. He retired early so he could spend more time with me, because my dad was always very busy and he was traveling all the time. So he retired early. And you could spend time with me and my brother. And so things I learned from him were tremendous. He was a community leader, right? So he retired as a general manager in an insurance company, but he wanted to do good for every single person that he always met, right? It didn't matter if it was, the help that was coming at our home, or it didn't matter if it was, the vegetable vendor on the street, like whoever that was. Like, and so I learned a lot from him around that, taking pleasure in successes of the others, right? I saw that firsthand, and I started absorbing that. It's also interesting. Last year, I went through with an executive coach, and it was a great exercise, because I started working with her, and I started sharing my stories with her, and she pointed me to something which we agreed upon, and what my leadership style, as I call it, is authentic leadership. It's more community-driven, success-oriented, authentic leadership, and it's based on three simple pillars, right? It's very, very simple. It's integrity, passion, and humility. I think it's just based on that, and so I think some of that was my upbringing. The others, to your point, of course, you go through a lot of different coaching, through the years that help to get to that level.
Yeah, I love the story about your grandfather and the positive influence he had on your life. And again, I can see why you and I immediately hit it off, and we've stayed in touch all these years, because you and I have a lot in common. Everything you're saying, the humility, the authenticity, are qualities, values that I share with you. So it just feels good to sort of have that sort of connection and have that in common. And I think, at least in my experience, I feel that is a rare quality, not giving myself credit, obviously, because I've had to develop these skills over many, many years and many, many mistakes. But as you said, the commitment to getting better. Why do you think it's so elusive, again, for some managers, not even first-time managers, but managers that maybe don't see their charter the same way you and I do, as far as what's important?
Yeah, I think it's so we live in a very competitive world, right? I think it's the situation, as you look at from a leadership standpoint, what is taught, and also people go through, whether you go through a management course or an MBA or something like that. I don't think you gain those skills immediately. I think it is your life experiences that teach you one, like I was initially mentioning, but then also over a period of time, I think you start really enjoying kind of developing people and working through that. I think you have to get to a point where you also become a servant leader. I think the servant mentality and servant leadership, a lot of people don't understand. Sometimes they feel like, oh, I'm the manager, I got to lay, what it is. But that's the difference when you start going from becoming a manager to a leader. And I think you have to develop servant leadership. And I think that's the piece that is, again, another thing that is now coming into the forefront quite a bit. But it happened. Like when I was reading management books, I never came across servant leadership until maybe a few years ago.
Right.
So I think that's now starting to show up a little more. So I do think, Antoine, that in the in the future, near future, here 3-5 years, I think we will start seeing a lot more of that servant leadership mentality.
Yeah, so for me, it was John Maxwell, Five Levels of Leadership, Patrick Lencioni, where I started to learn these things. So I'm just wondering, so the servant leader, and again, resonates for me. And also the notion, again, that you work for your team as opposed to the other way around, right? Irrespective of titles and org charts, you're really there to help. And then going back to, again, the pleasure you get out of developing talent. I learned that from John Maxwell's 5 Levels of Leadership. I don't know if you've read it, but his 5th level, or his highest level, is, yes, as a leader, you are creating other leaders. So I just wanted to share with you a personal story and just sort of get your thoughts. So a company I worked for after you and I worked together, when we have the executive meetings, I was the VP of customer success there. The CEO would ask icebreaker questions, and his icebreaker question was, what are you most proud of in the last 3 months or 6 months, whatever. And they went around the room and everybody touted, hitting targets and, crushing quotas, whatever. And I said, I'm most proud of developing the talent on my team and creating leaders. And, he kind of frowned at me, and he made me kind of feel bad, like somehow that wasn't a worthy sort of thing to be proud of. And you know what, to my credit, I pushed back and I said, I understand why you might not think so, but I'm telling you, based on my experience, that this is something that I've committed myself to and I get great pleasure, from doing. And I'm going to continue to do this, whether or not you think it's worthwhile or not. Now, I'm just curious, have you ever faced a situation where maybe someone above you and maybe didn't agree with your methodology or style, maybe told you to be more authoritative? And if so, how did you handle it?
It's interesting. First of all, I totally agree with you. You should push back on those sort of things, because it is a very critical and important aspect of leadership. Antoine, I have really been blessed having some great managers and leaders. I've now worked for my CEO, who I've been working for the last decade now. So I've been blessed with some really good mentors and some really good managers. So I have not had as much of those experiences. In fact, if anything, I've learned a lot more from my mentors and leaders about servant leadership, because I know my manager, my CEO, he practices that every single day, and I've learned a lot from him, right? So I think that's it's definitely a skill that I've also seen other people practice and then learn from that.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, because again, talking about Patrick Lencioni and the 5 dysfunctions of a team, I know that what I learned from that book is that it's the alignment between the executives that has to be there. And it starts with the CEO setting the tone. And then there's the cascade effect. So it sounds like in your case, you've been fortunate. You've had CEOs that have achieved sort of the same level of understanding and as far as what being a leader is. And if you found yourself in a situation where maybe, again, the leadership wasn't there, my assumption is you probably wouldn't put up with it for very long, would you?
Yeah, I guess so. Or try to see if I can fix the situation, right?
Right.
Maybe do something like that as well. But I think the thing there is, and we love Patrick Lencioni. We love the 5 dysfunctions of the team. We practice that. We bring the table group in regularly for our executive offsites and things like that. And I think the thing there also to learn is that you're absolutely right. The CEO sets the tone. And then the alignment within the executive team is so critical. Sometimes when it's a brand new team, you don't realize that there is no trust.
Right.
And it's a lot of artificial harmony, like they say in their books, right? Which is absolutely true. And I think it's the CEO's job to kind of break that artificial harmony, kind of create a little bit of healthy conflict and start developing trust.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And by the way, just to clarify my comment, when I say you wouldn't put up with it, I think the message or the lesson here for those watching, and something that I had to learn, is don't settle. Like, life is short. If you're in a situation professionally where you're not happy for whatever reason, yes, as you said, Maulik, make an effort to make things better, really try. And hopefully you can change someone's point of view or perspective to your view. And if not, don't stay there. Don't, I talked to some individuals again that are frustrated, they're unhappy about this, that, or the other. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? Oh, I tried everything. Okay, well, why are you still there? Like, it's a hot job market, plenty of jobs out there. If you're not happy, don't settle. Now let's talk about the values real quick. You mentioned trust and authenticity earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a connection there. And tell me if you agree or disagree. So,
yeah.
So yes, would you agree that creating a culture and an environment of trust is crucial within an organization and a team? And what I mean by that is, hey, we're all human. We all make mistakes. When it happens, nobody's going to get beat up or yelled at. We're just going to take ownership. We're going to identify what went wrong, and we're going to commit ourselves to getting better. But it's still kind of hard for some people to believe, isn't it? You could say it as a leader, but people will still be somewhat apprehensive because you're sort of the boss and maybe they don't know you. So can you talk about what methods, or maybe what are some of the things you've done to help convince people that your words are true, that you're not just saying it, you actually mean it? It's okay to be, sort of authentic and admit if you make a mistake.
I'm so glad you're talking about this, Antoine, because the one thing I've always believed in, and I've tried to tell this to my peers, and everybody I meet with on a regular basis, is that sometimes as an executive leadership team, if something goes wrong, the first question out of most of us, including myself, is who did it? Or how did that happen? Why did that happen? Well, you know what? That's that when you start with who did it, it's like your kids at home, right? When you're going to ask them, well, who broke this? They're all pointed at each other, right? It's the same thing. You can't start with that. I think that's one leadership lesson I've learned, in my life, that you can't really start with the who did, because then people stop admitting mistakes.
Yeah.
And it's not like you want them to kind of feel demeaning about themselves or feel really low. But I think the point really is, if you admit to your mistake, the first thing to starting to fix something is first acknowledge there's a problem, right? When you acknowledge, when you are self-aware that there was an issue, then you're going to start fixing it. And I think that self-awareness is important, and that acknowledgement is important. So you create a safe environment for people, right? Stop asking that question about who made the mistake, or how did this happen, or why does this happen? Let's first settle down. Let's understand what's going on, right? What went wrong? And let's understand, what do we need to do to address that? Yeah. Then you start getting into, put a very strong practice about reflect and correct. Like I'm a big believer in that. Like you always reflect and correct. The one thing, we all make mistakes. We all make several mistakes every day. But if you don't reflect upon that and you don't correct that, you're going to keep making those mistakes. So you gotta correct that. So you got to put that in rhythm, right? And then you have to coach people one-on-one and let them know, saying it's okay. It's okay to make that mistake, just like you would talk to your kids. It's okay to make a mistake, right? But at the same time, you have to continue. Well, the first mistake is forgiven. The second mistake, that's on you. You can't keep repeating that, right? So you got to make sure you don't repeat that thing. So creating a safe environment is good there.
I love that, Maulik, and you remind me of something I wanted to ask you about. We've talked about sports and the impact it's had on your life. We've talked about family, and both you and I are family men. We have children. And obviously, again, we work in this professional SaaS world. Do you see any parallels between the three? Are there certain core sort of, I wouldn't say, I don't know, necessary values, but there's just basic, I think, human behavior that applies across the board. Would you agree or disagree that there's some parallel there?
I wholeheartedly agree, because I think so. And the reason I agree with that, Antoine, is because I don't have to put up a face when I'm at home or when I'm at work, right? Because I'm the same guy, whether you meet me at a Starbucks or you meet me at my home or you meet me at work. I'm the exact same guy, right? Sometimes when you are in a certain position, like people like, oh, looking up to you and like, oh my God, he's walking around. Like, no, I walk around every day. I say hi to people. I'll pull somebody and say, let's go for a coffee. Like we do all the time. But I think I'll go back to the values. You're talking about something very important here, because these are the same things that you continue to be. You continue to be your authentic self 100% of the time, right? And I talk about humility. I think that's a big piece for me. I look for that humble nature or the humility aspect when I'm hiring someone.
Yeah.
That is very important. I watch that closely. And I also build genuine friendship with people based on that. Respect and trust is very important. I think those are very, very important things in all phases of life, whether you are at home or at work. And then hard work ethic. I think you show the hard work ethic, you continue doing that. And if I do that, these days we all work from home. My kids watch me working hard, working every single day. They're going to learn those values. There's a lot of parallels across the board here. So, hard work ethic, respect, trust, adapting to situations. Those are things, I use that across the board, whether I'm playing a sport or I'm at home or I'm at work.
Right. I love that. Again, something else I think we have in common. You mentioned being sort of, there's only one version of you. I can honestly say that there was a time where I felt like I needed to pretend to be somebody I wasn't at work. And it was quite laborious, right?
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of time and energy. And I must say how much better I felt and ultimately much more effective leader I was when I sort of finally let that go. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I'm fully sleeved, tattooed, and I used to think I had to hide it, that I couldn't show it, and I would wear a suit and a tie, and then I got to the point where I said, you know what, this is who I am, and I want to work in an organization that accepts me for who I am. And if they don't accept me, then that's not the kind of place I want to work. And what I found was that, again, I was a more effective leader because I was able to make a connection on a deeper level with the people in my team. But that's risky also for a leader, right? So we talked about the risks of an employee being sort of authentic and admitting when they make mistakes. Isn't it risky, though, for a leader to sort of be, again, 100% real and authentic, and because I've seen some cases where people say, oh, look at that, he's showing emotions, he's weak, I want a strong leader, and while I think there is some small portion of individuals that might react that way, I think the vast majority of people really appreciate the authenticity and the humanity, and again, will rally around you and sort of be more willing to sort of execute based on your humility. Would you agree or disagree?
I totally agree there. And I love your story, by the way. I think that's, it resonates with me. You mentioned something very, very critical there. I think it's sometimes it might seem that the leader can feel a little vulnerable, right? When you are going in and being your authentic self all the time. But I'll also tell you, Antoine, I go out to customer events, and I'm a music lover. I'll go dance if there's, even if there are customers around.
Yeah.
And they see one side of me, which is fine. But you gotta have, even when you have your one version, there are aspects to what you do. When I'm talking about business to them, they know I'm sharp, I'm focused, and I know what I'm talking about.
Right.
When I'm having dinner with them, when I'm joking around with them, that's fine too. But you need to have those sides of yourself as well, right? And that's fine. I think that, one side of yourself is a little lighter. The other side of yourself is that sharp leader that you are. And so long as you can maintain that balance, I think you should be okay.
Yeah, I love that. Now, Maulik, I want to be respectful of your time. I just have a couple more questions before I let you go, please. I want to just talk to you about a couple of different things. One is, we talked about leadership and how more inspirational leadership is needed. And do you see any differences, one, in maybe some of the older generation and the style they expect or respond to versus the younger generation? And then I'll ask you a follow-up question after that.
Are you talking more of millennials versus the baby?
Sure, yeah.
Go with that. It has been an interesting last 10 years or so, kind of, as the millennial workforce has got in, as much. and I think it has, you have to have, I mean, you have to adopt to that, and you have to look at, how do you work in that situation? I've always believed in situational leadership, right? So different strokes for different folks. And yes, there is a difference there. I do see certain values and qualities that are different. Like we all know, the millennials need instant, gratification. I did something great. Did you pat me on my back yet? It's things like that, right? I think they need that versus, some of the prior generation people. I think for them it's more of,
Right.
what it's similar to what I was saying, right? My hard work, is it being recognized? Now I'm going to put my effort in here, and I'm going to wait for my appraisal cycle to get rewarded and things like that. A little bit of a difference there. And I think I've also kind of adapted to that over the last 5 or 7 years. I personally have had to adapt quite a bit, because sometimes I find myself, talking about very objectively. I look at the problems and I start talking about that first. Whereas, the millennial workforce wants to acknowledge the good things first, and then you move on. So I've had to adapt myself a little bit in some of those situations as well. I don't know if that's hitting what you were.
It is. So let me give you an example. So again, I think one of the differences that I have noticed is the need for instant gratification. So for example, I get requests for promotion 6 months after I hire somebody that maybe is newer to the workforce. And the reality is, obviously, there's two things you need to consider as a leader. One is desire for promotion, and you got to love ambition. But there are times where, despite ambition, maybe that individual isn't quite ready yet. Have you ever faced situations like that, and how have you handled that?
Yeah, it's so I have my standard, people who work for me for years, they know this, that I've said this to them all the time. I always believe in a career. I start looking at a career as a staircase. If you start drawing a staircase, that's your stair, and then you have a little upward movement, and then you have a stair, you upward movement, and you go. That's how you draw a staircase. And so for me, it's like, here's where you are right now. You're moving there for you're going to stay there for 6 months or a year. You're going to move up. You're going to spend another year or 2 years out there. You're going to move up. I think the point is you acquire certain skills. Right. And I've had the same situations where every 6 months somebody would come in and say, why am I not so-and-so at this point, right? And I think it's understandable. And I respect the ambition there. But I also try to talk to them about acquiring the skills you need to be successful, because otherwise you can get there, but people also fail very quickly. Right. And the last thing you want to do is set somebody up for failure. You really want to help them succeed and gain the skills. So the other thing that I also do with people also is I send them back and I say, well, you want to get to point B, you're at point A. Tell me, what skills do you need when you are at point B? What skills do you have today? And can you create a gap analysis for yourself? And then tell me, how are you going to cross the bridge? When you do that, I think we can get you to point B. Okay. I think that's kind of the story I've used all the time.
I love that. Now, one other question I want to ask you that's related. Obviously with COVID, offices have been closed. At least in our case, we've been working from home since the fall of 2020. So I'm just wondering, how, if at all, have you had to sort of adapt your leadership style in a virtual world? Maybe, I don't know what your situation has been, if you've been in the office at all or it's all virtual, but how have you had to sort of cope in the last couple of years or year and a half?
I've been in my home office now 18 months, right? So I've been here. But no, I think it's been a very interesting journey, like everybody else, and everybody has to adapt and kind of look at how can they continue their leadership things. Like I mentioned in one of our conversations earlier, I like to walk around the floor. I like to talk to people. I like to see them in person, and I started missing that immediately. So the one thing I instituted with my teams last year was me and my leaders would just pick up the phone and call 10, 15 people. Just check in, saying, hey, how are things going? And sometimes you'd scare people saying, why is the CEO or the CCO calling me? And it'd be like, no, you're not in trouble. It's just, I want to check in on you. How are you doing as an individual? What's going on? I think those are some of the things that we've had to change to stay connected with people. Because here's the other thing, Antoine, with the workforce right now, everybody's losing 15, 20% of their staff every year. If you think about the 18 months, I think 30 to 40% of our staff that you've hired have never met you in person.
Right.
And they are somewhere that you don't even know. They're in a remote location. How do you build that connection?
Right.
The only way to do that is continue to chat with them. And Zoom's a great medium. And whenever we get opportunities, we have started doing a little bit of, bringing people together and doing some of that, in the last few months. But I think that's the one thing we've started doing, a lot more, just kind of call people and check in on them. I think that's one area that we've been active to.
Got it. Okay, last question, promise, and then I'll let you go. So I always like to ask, what do you consider yourself famous for? So I'll give you a couple of examples. Some people that I interviewed, one guy was a stand-up comic. Another person I spoke to just recently is in his part-time a DJ MC, he raps. I'm just curious, anything you want to share that's sort of unique and special about you would say like, hey, this is what I'm most famous for?
I don't think famous is the right term that I would use, but I think it's a well-known secret here, at least in our company and locally, that I love to play the sport. I love playing cricket, and so every weekend until 2019, until the pandemic, I used to play 3 leagues in the Sacramento area.
Wow.
3 different. I would go out Saturday, I would go out Sunday, every weekend, twice, 2 to 3 games a week. And that was a lot. So I did a lot of that. I still play the sport, although I'm getting to a point where I might be quitting soon, but that's a different story. And then the other thing that I'm most proud of, Antoine, in my life is when I was 17, actually 17 and a half, 18-ish, I started my first startup, and that was a big hit. And there's a little bit of a story which we may save for another day.
Okay.
But I used to have an internet cafe, because internet in India was only regulated by the government at that time. So I kind of had a startup then at that time, and I had a cafe, and I did that while I was going to college, and feel really proud about that that journey. So
that's incredible. I did not know that about you, and you're right. We'll have to save that for the next time we speak. Again, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you're super busy, so thank you again so much for taking the time to chat with me today and sharing your story. I personally learned a lot, and I feel a deeper connection with you. And let's keep the conversation going, and continued luck and success for you, my friend.
Yep, same to Antoine. Thank you so much for your time as well, and this is great. Really enjoyed it.
All right, we'll talk again soon. Take care.